For someone who calls himself a former Magic player, this sure is my third rant about it. Anyway, encore I guess. The algorithm delivered me to H-Puzzle's There Is No Phyrexian Deck. Man's right. I want to build further on his point. Among many brilliant things Rachel Weeks has said,
with all of these things together, it does sort of get sliversy.
Yeah.
Which is what every creature type sort of dreams to be in a tribal setting.
Ideally, you would have flavor, inspiring story, inspiring mechanics. Magic achieved this for a while. Over time, the IP got more complex and power creeped upward. The mechanics of it have grown out of control. Magic's designers took time to gain expertise in designing Magic. That's tautological, but given how massive the game is in terms of cultural significance, economic impact, and complexity, it's interesting to look back at their failures. It's more fun to ignore the fact that hindsight is 20/20 and tell ourselves we wouldn't have made the same mistakes, but can we do better? Right out of the gate, there was what I consider to be a fun practice: cycles. Richard Garfield always knew he wanted his game to take a much more systemic approach to its magic than most other fiction. This wasn't the first IP to distinguish the concept of magic into several colors, but name any other IP with 5 colors of magic. Yeah, neither can I. So, in the very first set, the limited edition Alpha, there was a horizontal cycle, a set of cards that are similar to each other in each color. There was the Boon cycle. Not that boon, different cycle. Lightning Bolt is interesting. Early players came up with quite a simple deck list: 40 Lightning Bolts, 20 Mountains. Garfield never thought the game would sell well enough that people would have that many multiples of anything, so a rule was added later restricting decks to no more than 4 of the same card. Even still, Lightning Bolt is a fairly strong card. Giant Growth has always been on the lower end of power. Dark Ritual is often the key to suddenly escalate into a rapid win. Healing Salve has always sucked. But Ancestral Recall is one of the power 9. These days, drawing 3 cards will cost you 5 mana. Mark Rosewater, currently the most recognizable name designing Magic, says that there is no way to do a boon cycle as late as 2019. Horizontal cycles are a great way to explore a concept from the perspective of the different color identities. The Boon Cycle is a card in each of the 5 colors that costs 1 mana of that color and gives you 3 of something relevant to that color. Lightning Bolt is from red, and it does what red wants: plain old damage. Don't bother summoning a creature, or doing a combat trick, or faffing about with any other junk. Tap, zap, pass the turn, and get back to your nap. Giant Growth is from green, and unlike red, green is creature-centric and patient. Summon a creature, send it to attack. See that it's unblocked. Okay, now you do your combat trick. This is why you can't just fix the Boon Cycle by having a card that costs 1 blue mana to deal 3 damage. You'd have a blue card that wouldn't fit with the essence of blue. Even in Alpha, there was always a color pie. 5 colors, each with a set of associations that form their identity. That's great. But then they had a very profitable set: Ravnica. Look at the color wheel. On Ravnica, there's a guild associated with each pair of colors. Now, instead of 5 factions to loosely identify with, there's 15. WotC managed to hit the sweet spot on defining them just specific enough that a player might identify with their good parts, and just vague enough that a player isn't likely to be put off by their bad parts. Just like astrology or Myers-Briggs or any number of BuzzFeed personality quizzes, now you can classify yourself with a community of like-minded hypothetical peers as desired. If you're WotC, this has the massive upside of giving you 10 flavors of merchandise to sell. Got a new manufacturer for playmats? Make one for each guild. Releasing a new type of deck box? Each guild needs one. Also, you'll need matching sleeves. The downside is you can never do this again. Going to a draft and all the good cards you crack left you with a blue-green deck? They say your deck is Simic. Magic players always have, and I assume always will, refer to the sets of colors as though they're dictated by the factions associated with them rather than the other way around. They don't say Simic is blue-green, they say blue-green is Simic. Strixhaven, aka legally distinct Hogwarts, was not able to break this habit. Blue-green is still Simic, and now Quandrix is Simic. The Simic Combine is Diet Phyrexia, but let's get back to Phyrexia. When Phyrexia was first conceived, it was black through and through. At that time, the color wheel didn't have distinct identities for white and black. White was good, black was evil. The first Phyrexians were a disjointed mess of cyborgs and fantasy, Giger-esque aliens, and straightforward demons. As the major villains at the time, Phyrexians had associated mechanics. Usually you would sacrifice a creature for some benefit.
From my point of view, the Jedi are evil!
After all, how else can you capture murderous villainy in a mechanic when the story of a game is always going to be a fight to the death? In 1999, a novel was published as a prologue to the cycle of sets where the Phyrexians invade. In the extremely distant past, there was an empire called the Thran. Yawgmoth was a Thran physician happy to overdiagnose Thysis, high fantasy radiation poisoning, so he could experiment on people and invent what he would argue is a cure. Thysis is Thran for continual degradation, so Yawgmoth invented glistening oil that would give people pheresis, or continual progression. A person treated with glistening oil to contract this continual progression becomes a Phyrexian. Yada yada yada, he becomes godlike and gets banished to another plane that he calls Phyrexia. Centuries pass while he builds an army of Phyrexians to try and invade his home plane. Aesthetically, the invasion-era Phyrexians were, well, invaders. All of that backstory informed new Phyrexian cards that still had a lot of creature sacrifice, color hate, and paying your own life points as an extra resource. Black mana was still just generically evil, so Phyrexia was black and did the evil things. Story ends, Yawgmoth gets killed. Let's jump forward in time. Karn set up a plane of metal he really likes called Mirrodin. Jump forward further, there's Ravnica, where WotC started all that business about your horoscope/guild. Let's go to Phyrexia yet again. Mirrodin is a world of metal. Over time here, organic material becomes metal, and metal becomes organic. As a golem made out of silver, Karn can relate. Magic is manifested through 5 moons. Karn had a single drop of glistening oil left behind on Mirrodin, and now a pheresis outbreak is spreading. So we've got our story beats, check. How does that translate to in-game mechanics? Remember all that story setup? The unwilling medical experimentation, the insidious glistening oil? At last, it has in-game representation. Infect. Deals damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters, and players in the form of poison counters. 10 poison counters makes you lose. Poison counters existed before canon introduced Phyrexians, but now story informs the mechanic. It's not just that the opposing Phyrexian forces are sacrificing their own allies and killing yours, you are being infected. This is the Phyrexian identity. Infection as conversion. As the Phyrexians infect Mirrodin to convert it to New Phyrexia, the insidious infiltration was also captured in a mechanic, proliferate. Choose, not target, any number of permanents and or players with counters, then give them another counter of a kind already there. Later errata to each kind already there. It's honestly my favorite mechanical representation of a story beat ever. The infection is metastasizing. Plane conversion complete, we got introduced to Phyrexian mana. You could pay mana, or you could pay life. While ancient Phyrexians grew newts to then complete into soldiers, new Phyrexians just need a germ to clumsily, unnervingly be the pilot of a living weapon. You just create an equipment and it comes with a germ to wield it. Mechanically, the problem is already evident. The representation of Phyrexianness is spread over several mechanics. Aesthetically, Phyrexia has drifted a bit. In Antiquities, Phyrexia was just legally distinct hell. In Invasion, the theme was a body horror of grotesque modification, in line with their beliefs that the body is inadequate. As the glistening oil infects and converts Mirrodin, the influence of and on the moons differentiates Pheresis into each color of mana. 5 Praetors have emerged. In the past, Yawgmoth gave that title to his second-in-command. While the 5 factions battle for supremacy not just over Mirrodin, but over each other, we get to explore the negatives of the color pie. Where each color of mana has a central tenet, the new Phyrexian factions corrupt that value. White mana is about unity. The machine orthodoxy is a fascist, cultic theocracy. Blue mana is about knowledge. The progress engine will break any rule to help their research. Black mana is about ambition. The 7 Steel Thanes cannot share power, they're the faction that hasn't even settled on a leader within themselves. Red mana is about freedom. The Quiet Furnace seeks such radical freedom that they're self-destructive. Green mana is about growth. The Vicious Swarm are in a constant gladiator tournament to evolve to perfection. Or just the last one alive. Same difference. Each faction has finally coalesced their visual identity so well that it lasts until the much later set, All Will Be One. The Machine Orthodoxy's Alabaster host loves blood-red sinew and tooth enamel plating. The Progress Engine's Chrome host loves cybernetic tentacles, glowing blue lights, and chrome. The Etched hosts tend to have glowing red etchings and sometimes evoke big imposing architecture, or sometimes are skeletal and spidery. The Furnace host makes use of steel that's sometimes black, sometimes red hot, and frequently arranged in long vertical lines. The Copper hosts tend to look much closer to natural, if mutant, creatures, often with copper motifs. So in the sets Phyrexia, All Will Be One, and March of the Machine, WotC takes another pass at the Phyrexian mechanical identity. Some creatures have Toxic, which is the nerfed version of Infect. Some cards have Corrupted, which is an ability that wants an opponent to have 3 or more poison counters. There's Proliferating. This set added oil counters. Generally, you want more of them. This set added Incubate, which I think marks their 5th attempt at making Morph happen. Generally, it shows up in the form of also Incubate X. For the most part, the two sets feel like horizontal cycles of Phyrexianness. White cards have the typical white combat abilities, but this time when they bring a friend, it's a might. Blue is countering spells, benefiting from you casting other spells, drawing cards, and proliferating. Black is doing more necromancy than ever. Many cards are sack outlets. Many have triggered abilities on their own death. Red cards like to do all the things red does. Sometimes we ditch 2 cards to get 2 new cards. Sometimes we're just breaking artifacts. Sometimes we're hasty. Sometimes we take our time. We have a slightly better Threaten. We have a 1-turn creature factory. We have a damage doubler. Other than occasionally involving oil counters, I don't know if there's any 2 red cards that work together well at all in all of All Will Be One. Green is where you'll mostly find big tough guys, but here on Phyrexia, they tend to be toxic. So in general, there's some faffing about with oil, but other than that, it's just the usual color pie stuff. In other words, why not run the old deck archetypes with 1 or 2 stray Phyrexian cards tossed in? Wouldn't it be great to have Mondrak, Glory Dominus, and Elspeth Tyrell working together? Doesn't make any mechanical sense to focus on Phyrexia. If you're focusing on oil counters, you're making a counters deck, and focusing on +1/+1 counters tends to be simpler and more effective. If you're making a toxic deck, you'll want a Diet Voltron that happens to have Skytherix as your VIP, or maybe a Go Wide that just might involve Triumph of the Hordes. How do other tribal decks do it? Like Rachel said, all tribal decks aspire to be sliver decks. Let's jump way back to Planeshift. Volrath, some Phyrexian, brought a Sliver Queen and her brood to his stronghold for the invasion of Dominaria. They died. 100 years later, Empress Lawan starts the Riptide Project, a joint research lab so the cephalids and surface dwellers can learn and understand and be friends and all that good stuff. Researchers on Riptide Island brought those slivers back to life, minus the queen. They immediately overtook the laboratory. So you can see how the story is creating this idea of bioweapons evolving out of control. That's why early slivers all had abilities that were some form of all slivers get some ability. Powerful bioweapons, but they're not exactly on your side. If your opponent is running a sliver or changeling deck, great, because the abilities refer to all creatures by the creature type. Slivers in particular play well together because it's not hard to make a deck where they all cooperate. It's good if one of your creatures has double strike, it's better if they all do. It's good if one of your creatures has haste, it's better if they all do, and so on. However, who's going to buy the new cards if they have perfectly good old cards? Power must creep upward. Modern slivers have abilities that say slivers you control get some ability. With respect to story, it doesn't make any sense. But power scales upward, so sliver decks are even more powerful. As if they weren't unbeatable enough already, check out the theoretical maximum state of a sliver. The best tribal deck has been and will be slivers, because all slivers are working toward the same goal: more abilities on more slivers. Meanwhile, what do Phyrexians want? Story-wise, the only thing they can agree on is proliferation. Mechanically, proliferation unavoidably relies on other mechanics, so you can only possibly care about proliferate as a stepping stone. The situation is beyond repair. Magic in general is. But how could WotC make a mechanical Phyrexian identity to encourage the emergence of a Phyrexian deck? Phyrexians are a creature tribe, and other tribal decks have a simple, focused strategy that mechanically reflects the flavor of their creature type. Merfolk will tempo, goblins will have lots of cheap and expendable creatures. Phyrexians might have some of many thematic abilities, infect or toxic or wither, on-death triggered abilities. You might be able to pay life instead of mana. What strategy can form around all this? It's a mess. Like H-Puzzle says, the Phyrexian mechanical identity is spread too thin. Why can't we just go back to Infect? Before All Will Be One, Infect was the Phyrexian mechanical identity. Unfortunately, there's a divergence between design intention and player desire here. Players feel Infect is too strong, apparently, so WotC doesn't want to bring it back. They tried Wither and Toxic to retain that Infect magic, but make it feel less terrifying. However, there is one card that presents a paradigm that would make Infect feel less powerful.
Healing! Wellness! Leeches!
WotC hates this card. Poison, i.e. Phyrexianization, isn't supposed to be reversible. At least, that rule holds for game mechanics. Isn't that right, Nissa?
Got better.
Players hate Infect, WotC hates leeches, therefore the only flagship Phyrexian ability is dead. That problem will never be fixed. Rather than just complaining, I have ideas, with the benefit of hindsight. One of the most common things people made fun of March of the Machine for was that it wanted to be Marvel so bad. But at last, the student has surpassed the master. March of the Machine released in April of 2023. It wasn't until June that Disney Plus started streaming Secret Invasion.
You could really play with the shape-shifting Skrull thing, you know, they could be anyone at any time, really create some tension in the scenes. Oh yeah, that would have been good, dang it, wow.
In the past, I've made fun of Elish Norn's sudden shift to the much dumber strategy of invade everywhere all at once now. It's not just that the newer, dumber strategy is transparently dictated by outside incentives. It's also that the older strategy makes for much more fun stories, like this one. Mechanically, though, the concept of a sleeper agent is almost entirely untouched. Ajani got the title on his completed Planeswalker card, but he's just doing his typical Ajani things. The first wave of Phyrexians had Xantcha, who shows up on 2 cards. In Urza's Saga, being given a free 3/3? Incredible. Worth the life for sure. The more modern Xantcha ramps up the safeguard and benefit for her owner, and as a 5/5, her controller is more tempted to keep her around. There's so much design space here. First line, same as Xantcha, this enters under the control of an opponent. Second line, an ability any player can activate. Or just downside for the controller. Or maybe Elish Norn could learn from a much more competent domineering villainess, Olivia Voldaren. Sting a creature, convert it, and Olivia gets a benefit. Spend a bunch of mana, steal control of it. One would think the faction with the ultimate goal of completing the multiverse would have more than 0 ways to steal control of your opponent's creatures. It would be even more on flavor if instead of putting a +1/+1 counter on your creature, you put a counter on the target creature. You remember I said Simic is Diet Phyrexia? I feel like the two factions would love to exchange notes. Why are Phyrexians scary? They talk about improvement, perfection, the word flay shows up a lot. When I explain Phyrexians to non-magic nerds, I invoke Doctor Who's Cybermen.
You will be upgraded.
The Phyrexian modus operandi is similar. They plan to complete you, and the fact that you don't want to be completed only serves as further evidence to them that you need to be completed. Complete is a real word, by the way. It means you have all the necessary elements and skills. What a Phyrexian might call necessary is problematically different from what you might call necessary. They think you need more spikes, you prefer to keep having skin. They would give you a bladed weapon where you would prefer to keep both hands. Most importantly, they don't value selfhood, so they see yours as detrimental to the great work. What is this great work they're always going on about? What is the perfection that they're all seeking as an end goal? What is the name of the card that shares its name with the set with the last good storyline? What is their favorite 4-word phrase?
All will be one.
The philosophy of all will be one was best captured in Phyrexian Rebirth. Mechanically perfect. Flay the false flesh of the world, recycle all that power into one more perfect creature. For as much as Norn likes to repeat all will be one, she sure is trying to incubate an army of many. Incubation is the creation of more Phyrexians. That's not all will be one, that's our group will be many-er than your group. What's a better way to capture the story of Phyrexia with mechanics, other than just a deck of entirely Phyrexian Rebirth? Some other way to get value out of a creature in a way that isn't terribly concerned for the creature's well-being. Ashnods and Phyrexian altars are the purest forms of this, and a great start. As a Magic player, mana is the currency with which you buy power. Some of the greatest Phyrexian cards are the living weapons, equipment that you cast, and you get a 0/0 germ token equipped for free to wield it. If ever you take the equipment off the token, it's a 0/0, so it dies. I bring up living weapons to talk about two other old Phyrexian equipments, Grafted Exoskeleton and Grafted War Gear. Useful for Infect decks. +2/+2 and Infect. Or +3/+2 and you equip it for free. The downside of both is that if you ever have to move the equipment, its former wielder dies. This sort of grafting is exactly what we're looking for. All of this leads me to the most Phyrexian word that doesn't quite have an official ability. Splice. There's a bunch of modern splicers. They tend to come with a golem and work well with golems. Isn't that the heart of why it's scary to be captured by a Phyrexian? They plan to recycle you into a golem. This is done most straightforwardly by the OG Phyrexian splicer. 2 and tap, transfer, and ability. Temporarily. Here's my idea. What if Phyrexians could splice any ability from a permanent? Maybe you'd have to sacrifice it, or the splicing process would help you destroy it. Maybe you'd exile it from a graveyard. Ikoria gave us keyword counters already. The notion of a counter that grants an ability is well established. As long as Phyrexia's favorite thing to do is proliferate, there could be something valuable to proliferate. So valuable that now I'm concerned about balance. Should you be expected to pay the mana value of a targeted permanent to splice it? Should it target non-land permanents only, just to ensure no one targets Dark Depth's third ability? Or is Dark Depths even that worrying given the existence of Thespian's stage? Phyrexian mana is an excellent way to scratch the surface of what Phyrexia is great at. Convert your own life total into value. Might as well, you win just as hard with 1 life point as with 100. But why stop there? Why not have abilities to turn your life total into lots of forms of value? Trading Post and Bitter Blossom reliably spitting out a creature for something other than mana was surprisingly useful. Phyrexian Arena getting you card advantage for the low price of 1 life was excellent. And what about the other way around? Phyrexian Unlife could have been much cooler. Usually cards like this, let's call them Lich effects, let you lean on something else rather than your life total. If you ask me, Phyrexian Unlife should have been more like Lich's Tomb, but with the caveat that it would be another permanent. That would be a much more fun direction to take Phyrexian mana, rather than the Planeswalker ability being the opposite of the actual definition of the word. Among the many attempts at a Phyrexian mechanic, incubate. Generally, incubating is a barely related side effect of doing other stuff. Create an artifact, and if you ever have 2 mana to spare, you unmorph it, and you got yourself a Phyrexian. Here's the thing. You will never have excess mana. If you have 2 mana up, you're signaling to your opponent that you have a counterspell in hand. If you spend 5 mana to Sunfall, spend at least 1 mana to proliferate, and have 2 mana to transform your new token, you're really hoping that your opponent had at least 9 creatures on his side of the board first. But let's imagine an alternate history where mana burn was never removed. In 2009 and before, if you ended a turn phase with mana left, when you lost the mana, you also lost a life for each mana lost. Imagine we advanced another 14 years with the idea that you needed to be sure not to draw too much mana lest it backfire. We might even have some thematic place to explore scarecrows. You could still have your usual combos where you create infinite mana and spend it on some repeatable process. After all, Final Fortune sets a precedent for giving yourself an extra turn at instant speed for only 2 mana. Then, when we're trying to have the Phyrexians emerge, they can represent the flip side of that aesthetic. They're always looking to produce more mana, and they use it to fuel their great work. If Infect can't be the flagship Phyrexian ability anymore, why not Proliferate? Because that's what we're really trying to do here, spread and grow Phyresis. Mirrodin didn't become new Phyrexia because of Memnarch's kidnapping, it was a drop of glistening oil. I think this is what WotC was aiming for with oil counters, but there just isn't enough of it. Proliferating is expensive because it can hit a lot of great counters. What if the glistening oil got to do its own thing? Most obviously, grow, itself and its host. Let's imagine Phyresis counters. The Day-Night Helper card has a novella on it. We can have a helper card with a bunch of words to explain our high fantasy nanomachines. Have them self-proliferate quickly. Have that grafted effect where the creature dies without it. Have it increase the thing's combat effectiveness. Provide an incentive to remove them. And of course, have a way for it to spread. Now the oil counters are something more than fuel. I just realized something. All of the Phyrexian mechanics I proposed correspond to the corruption of a color's values. The real solution is to have 5 different corrupted color identity factions rather than the mess of Phyrexians we wound up with. WotC could have compromised and picked out 5 mechanical identities and organized each into a color. White Phyrexians could steal control of creatures, blue Phyrexians could take up extreme biology, black Phyrexians could very directly use life as a resource, red Phyrexians could burn through mana, and green Phyrexians could do what they want to do most, grow. Too late now. The entire plane is in permanent timeout, insofar as any modern IP is allowed to do anything permanent. I've been speaking the wrong language this whole time. Let me put on some metaphorical cufflinks to attempt a communion with the soulless business husks who make decisions. Magic's power creep has made possible crossover deals less viable. I had a thought. Why has Magic not done a crossover with that other magical franchise? There's a Stranger Things crossover where the kids get a Friends Forever mechanic. There's a secret lair drop of goddamned SpongeBob. How is there no Harry Potter? Much like everyone else, I forgot about Strixhaven. If you're a recovering MTG player, be honest. Did you forget that I mentioned Quandrix earlier in this video? Guys, I cracked a box of this set and I forgot it exists. Magic already set the stage for a Harry Potter crossover, but it can't be done for 2 reasons. One is that Hogwarts is very sharply divided into 4 factions, which can't quite work with Magic's 5. But the other is that in the Harry Potter universe, Magic users are all morons. Pick any planeswalker who was ignited and alive at the time Strixhaven was released. Let loose in the Harry Potter universe. An evil one like Tezzeret would have it conquered in a week. In that amount of time, a good one like Saheeli would fix so many problems it would overturn society, which happens to be the problem any story has with the introduction of magic. The Harry Potter universe already constantly begs the question of why the wizard world allegedly has unbeatable magic and isn't in charge. Introducing magic users who are so much more powerful that their core competency needs to be mitigating their own mistakes means Magic can't have any Harry Potter cards that would make sense. I guess a typical vial of liquid luck, something one gives to a 3rd grader, would have to be legendary? Fog is unplayable. Would Expecto Patronus be a fog effect, but exclusively for one creature type? Harry's favorite spells seem to be Expelliarmus and Stupefy. I guess Expelliarmus would remove equipment. Maybe Stupefy could bring back stun counters. Harry himself could have something like Death Touch against black creatures with power 0. Broomsticks would be artifacts to grant flying to a single creature, of course. Actual Strixhaven had Zephyr Boots, which also lets you loot on Connect. It's not viable. I am poking fun. Strixhaven had founder dragons who work as faculty and in their free time burninate the countryside, while Harry Potter has an owl who, admittedly, can block. It shows that Strixhaven would obviously win a death battle, but again, I forgot Strixhaven exists. After this video, I'm going to forget again. Meanwhile, Harry Potter is interesting enough that it got children to read a book. A series of books. The last time the cast of the MTG story got too powerful and numerous, a plot contrivance had to depower and depopulate them. I can imagine a plotline where the Eldrazi act as some cosmic balancing force. Unfortunately, that only works for story. Mechanically, there's no going back. That's why alternate formats pop up. It gets especially bad when crossover events are canonized. Obviously, Magic was foaming at the mouth to crossover with Avengers, but when they did cool and interesting things, they also had a Mayan Aztecs vs. Vampire Conquistadors set. So they did a Jurassic Park crossover. Turns out, in the context of MTG, Dr. Ian Malcolm will kill Black Panther. They've tried to fix it. Alchemy. Only possible on the online version, your cards will be changed out from under you. Not as bad as various platform barons deciding that they can surprise you with an expiration date on your purchases, but still. They're messing with your stuff, which is not tolerable. We cannot save Magic. Lay it to rest.